Today we're going to take a look at ribbon stitch, which is a really easy texture stitch. And you can see it's called ribbon stitch because we've got these nice gathered bands that look like ribbons. It's really easy to work, and I'm going to take you through it step by step. So here I have a swatch already begun, and we're ready to work row 6. Now I'm starting on row 6 because row 1 through 6 is all the same. It's just knit, which is garter stitch, knit every row. So this is the right side of my work. This is the wrong side. And I'm just gonna work this row in knitting like I did for rows 1 through 5. Don't drop your stitches like I just did. So remember when you're knitting your stitches that you want to keep your working yarn in the back, and you want to insert your right hand needle from left to right through the front loop of that stitch on your left hand needle. And wrap the yarn around, pull it through, slip it off your left hand needle. So yarn is always in the back. And if I were to continue just knitting every row, I'd get a nice band of garter stitch, which is a reversible stitch. But when we get to the next row, we're going to start switching things up and then working stocking stitch, sometimes called stockinette stitch, and that stitch isn't reversible. So now I've knit to the end of my row. That's row 6. So row 1 through 6 are all the same. And now I'm going to begin the stocking stitch ribbon, which is what this looks like down here. So for row 7, I'm going to KFB and repeat that to the end of the row. So KFB stands for knit in front and back. It's an increase, and we're going to basically make 2 stitches out of every stitch on our needle, and we're going to double the amount of stitches. That's what makes these nice little gathers. So row 7, KFB. So to work a KFB, I'm going to knit as I have been with the yarn held in the back, inserting the needle from left to right into the stitch on the left hand needle, and I'm going to wrap the yarn around. Try that again. Wrap the yarn around, pull up a loop, and instead of sliding it off the needle, I'm going to knit again into that very same stitch, but this time I'm going to knit into the back loop, which, if I turn my needle a little bit, maybe you can see that. I'm going to insert the needle into that stitch again, but through that back loop. It gets a little tight, but that's okay. Wrap the yarn around again, pull it through, and now you can see I've got 2 loops on my right hand needle, and then drop the stitch off. So let me show you that again. So that's 1 KFB, I've increased 1 stitch. So I'm going to knit into the front loop of that stitch on the left hand needle, pull the yarn through, and then I'm going to knit again into that stitch by inserting my needle, it's slippery, into the back loop of that stitch, pulling the yarn around, pulling up that loop, and then dropping the stitch off the needle. Do that one more time. It gets easier. So knit into the front of the stitch, wrap the yarn around, pull the yarn through, don't drop that stitch off the left hand needle, insert your needle again into the back loop of that stitch, wrap the yarn around, drop a loop, and slip the stitch off the needle. So you can see now I've only worked 3 stitches, but I've turned each stitch into 2. Now I've got 6 stitches on the right hand needle. And I'm going to do that all the way across this row. So if you're working a large piece, let's say you were doing a blanket in this stitch, you would want to make sure that you have needles long enough to accommodate all of those stitches. And there are different kinds of increases where we're working a KFB, knit in front and back stitch here. This is a nice simple way to increase stitches, especially when you're doing increase after increase after increase all in a row. Okay, so that's my row 7. And now my 8th row, the wrong side row, I'm going to purl all of these stitches. So to purl, I'm keeping my yarn held to the front of my work, and then I'm going to insert my needle from the right to the left in the next stitch, wrap the yarn around, pull the yarn through, slip the stitch off the left hand needle. So keeping the yarn in front, insert your needle from right to left through the next stitch, wrap the yarn around, pull that yarn through, slip the stitch off your left hand needle. So switching to purling on the wrong side and knitting on the right side is what creates the different texture and makes this stocking stitch as opposed to the garter stitch we were working before. So for this row, I am just purling all the way across. So these bands of stocking stitch take a little longer to knit than your rows of garter stitch, like rows 1 through 6, because you have twice as many stitches on the needle. But it's definitely worth it for this look. So now when I turn around, now I'm on a right side row, the 9th row, and this time I'm knitting every stitch. So just as before, for knitting, I'm keeping my yarn held to the back of the work, and instead of right to left as purling, I'm going from left to right, inserting my right hand needle, wrap the yarn around, and pull it through. So for the next few rows, we're just working stocking stitch or stockinette stitch. So every right side row, I'm going to knit every stitch, and every wrong side row, I'm going to purl every stitch. Okay, now I'm at row 13, which is a right side row, and you can see I've got this wide band of stocking stitch now on top of that narrower band of garter stitch. And that's what makes this great contrast texture. And to get this to sort of ripple like this, I now have to decrease back to the same number of stitches that I had when I was doing my garter stitch rows. So that increase and decreasing is what makes this nice ripple. So for row 13, I'm going to decrease by knitting 2 together all the way across the row. So I'm cutting my stitches in half, whereas previously I doubled my stitches. So to work a knit 2 together, it's really easy. It's just as it sounds. I'm going to insert my right hand needle from left to right, and instead of working into this first stitch, I'm going to work into the second stitch and that first stitch on my left hand needle together. Wrap the yarn around, pull the yarn through, and slip both those stitches off the left hand needle. And I'm going to do that all the way across. So that's K2 tog is the abbreviation, or knit 2 together. So insert your needle from left to right through both stitches at the same time, wrap the yarn around, pull that yarn through, and slip your yarn, those 2 stitches off the left hand needle. So I'm inserting my needle from left to right through both stitches, wrapping the yarn around, pulling the yarn through, and slipping those 2 stitches off at the same time. And I'm keeping my yarn held to the back of the work because these are knit stitches. They're knit 2 together. So I'm working 2 together all the way across the row, turning 2 stitches into 1. Okay, and there's my last 2 stitches knit together, and you can see we have a lot fewer needles or stitches on the needles. And you can already see the ripple effect starting to happen here. We've pulled in all of those stitches we worked in stocking stitch or stockinette stitch. And now I'm going to turn my work in the very last row of this 14 row repeat is a knit. So now we're on a wrong side row, but we're knitting, so we're back to that garter stitch, just like rows 1 through 6 are knit. And that's row 14. And if you repeat those 14 rows, you'll get this great ripple effect. So it's a really easy stitch with lots of good texture, and it's great for beginners. It's really easy to practice your knits and purls, and you get a really cool looking stitch. So that's it for ribbon stitch.